Welcome to Sola Church Online.
I'm Alan Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers, and together we lead Sola Church in Santa Monica, California.
We meet in person and online on Sundays at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Our in-person service is held at Joslyn Park Auditorium, which is indoors at 633 Kensington Road.
And our pre-recorded online service can be found on our website, solachurch.life, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. That's at Sola Church LA.
And we've got a great service for you today. Let's worship.
the presence of my enemies. I raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief. I raise a hallelujah. My weapon is a melody. I raise a hallelujah. Heaven comes to fight for me. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm, louder and louder. You're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive. I raise a hallelujah with everything inside of me. I raise a hallelujah. I will watch the darkness leave. I raise a hallelujah in the middle of the mystery. I raise a hallelujah. Fear you lost your hold on me. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm, louder and louder. You're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive. Sing a little louder, 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 sing a little louder in the presence of my enemies. Sing a little louder, louder than the unbelief. Sing a little louder, my weapon is a melody. Sing a little louder, heaven comes to fight for me. Sing a little louder in the presence of my enemies. Sing a little louder, louder than the
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If you're just checking us out today, please don't feel obligated to give. But if Sola Church is your church home, or if Sola Church Online has just been a blessing to you, it's super easy to make a one-time tax-deductible donation or even to schedule a recurring gift.
The easiest way is to scan the QR code on your screen. But you can always go to solachurch.life and click the tab at the top that says Give.
Now, Giving Tuesday is not this week, but next. It's November 28th. And this year, our year-end goal is to raise $40,000. I don't know if that sounds like a lot to people. Last year, our goal was $15,000. And by God's grace and your generosity, we raised that and even exceeded that a little bit. This year, we need to raise that same amount. The extra $25,000 has to do with the vision that God has given us for 2024. I'm going to mention it in my message, but we're making some big plans for the new year, and it's going to take some financial resources to make that happen. You guys have partnered with us in the past. We're asking you to prayerfully consider partnering with us again this year and heading into the future. And together, let's believe God to provide everything that we need to do what He's calling us to do.
We know that God can do it.
That's right. Amen. We've seen it.
Yeah. Let's get into our time of teaching.
So it's been said that there are three kinds of people in the world: those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who don't know what happened. Last weekend, we talked about impatience. But is it possible to be too patient? Like, how do we know when it's time to act, to take initiative? Let's go ahead and open the Bible to 1 Samuel chapter 14. We're calling this series in 1 and 2 Samuel Outliers. And by outliers, we mean something that lies outside the group. Like if the group is like this, the outlier is like that. If the group is like that, the outlier is like this. And we've acknowledged that we are all imperfect people with imperfect lives, but an outlier is one of these imperfect people with an imperfect life who has found another way of being in this broken world. A way made possible by this loving, giving, forgiving God we meet on the pages of the Bible. So this week in part 2 of Timing is Everything, I want to start by saying that we have to act when the people who should act won't. Look with me, 1 Samuel 14, beginning in verse 1. It says, "Now it happened one day that Jonathan the son of Saul said to the young man who bore his armor, 'Come, let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side.' But he did not tell his father. And Saul was sitting in the outskirts of Gibeah, Saul his father, under a pomegranate tree, which is in Migron. The people who were with him were about 600 men. Ahijah," and it goes on to tell us, who his ancestors were. He was the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, someone we've met before. He was wearing an ephod, but the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. So a little bit of review. There was tension between Israel and Philistia, which is, was located in modern Gaza. Ancient Philistia was in modern Gaza, not to say that modern Palestinians are related to the ancient Philistines. We've talked about that before, but when we talk about Philistia, we're talking about Gaza, where war is currently going on in the Middle East. And so the Philistines, they had 30,000 chariots. They had 6,000 horsemen. They had more foot soldiers than could even be numbered. But the Israelites, well, they had 600 foot soldiers. And only 2 of them, Saul, the king, and Jonathan, his son, had a sword and a spear. They lived in the Iron Age. And in this region, the only blacksmiths were in Philistia. Imagine that. If the only place that you could get modern weaponry was the place that you had conflict with. I mean, it would be like if we were dependent on China for something. Wait. Well, the Philistines had split into 3 companies. and they had sent a garrison to guard the pass of Michmash. That's where things landed at the end of chapter 13. A pass like that would be easily defended. But that brings us to the verses we read in verse 1, where it says it happened one day that Jonathan said, "Come, let us go over to the Philistines' garrison." One day. You know, we have an idiom, one day. And sometimes we use that idiom to refer to something happening on a day in the past. That's like our text. You know, it happened one day. But other times we use that idiom to refer to some point in the future. You know, that's when we say something like, well, one day, I hope this will happen. Or one day, I hope it will be like that. So the cool thing is that I think it's like they're having a conversation, you know. Jonathan and his armor bearer must have had many conversations about the situation. And those conversations probably went something like this, something like, you know, it won't always be like this. One day things will be different. But how did they go from, you know, one day, a day in the past, to a transition to one day, a time in the future when? I mean, to me, this reference to one day, it almost seems sort of offhanded and incidental. But to me, it's a reminder that any day can be that day, that every day can be that day, that today could be the day that you and I put something in motion to move us from, you know, once upon a time to, you know, a preferred future. Now, the interesting thing is that, you know, they decide to act, but look who wasn't acting. We see Saul, the king, in verse 2, inactive. We see Ahijah, the priest, in verse 3, inactive. The storyteller points out that Ahijah, you know, was wearing the ephod. Why is that important? Well, because attached to the ephod would be the breastplate, and attached somehow to the breastplate would be the Urim and the Thummim. Now, scholars don't even know exactly what the Urim and the Thummim were, but it's understood that somehow the Urim and the Thummim were used to discern the will of God. So Ahijah had a means to, you know, try to understand what God's will was in this situation, and apparently he wasn't using them. And as for Saul, mentioned in verse 2, well, the storyteller points out that Saul was sitting under a tree. Why was that important? Why did the storyteller draw our attention to Saul's posture? Well, Saul should have been on his toes. He wasn't even on his heels, but instead he was on his bottom, the king of Israel, on his tuchus. You know, if it's a mistake to get ahead of God, and it is, it's also a mistake to fall behind God. I feel like I hear a lot about the danger of being on our toes and very little about the danger of staying on our heels. Like, the funny thing is that for every person I've known who got ahead of God, I've known countless others who fell behind him. And I want to know why we don't hear more about that. You know, there are some people who spiritualize procrastination. There's nothing spiritual about procrastination. If my goal is simply to not get ahead of God, my goal is inadequate. I mean, my goal must be to not get ahead of God or fall behind him, to not veer off to the right or to the left, but to stay in step with him. That's why I say it's good to wait on God, but it's not good to keep God waiting. We have to act when the people who should act won't. When the king in our life won't act. When the priest in our life won't act. That is our time to shine. And so if you look around you and you see inactivity, even from among those who should be acting, well, maybe that's a sign that this is your time. It's interesting that Jonathan didn't even tell his dad what he was up to. Maybe he thought his dad would try to talk him out of it. Or maybe he thought his dad would take credit for it, as happened in the previous chapter. Well, check this out. Number 2, we have to act even when it's hard. Look at verse 4. Between the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other side. And the name of one was Bozez, and the name of the other was Senna. The front of the one faced northward opposite Michmash, and the other southward opposite Gibeah. So we see these two rock formations. I mean, these guys were literally between a rock and a hard place. Boses means glistening. Some would say slippery. And Senna means thorny. Are you in a slippery, thorny place right now in your life? No one said it was going to be easy, or did they? Did someone tell you it was going to be easy? You know, sometimes people say things like that, and it's just silly. It's just nonsense. And what that leads to is it leads to us living our lives with our finger in the air, trying to figure out which way the wind is blowing, because we think that circumstances, you know, are always a reliable indicator of what to do or not to do in life. A lot of us assume that a tailwind is always a green light from God, and that's not always true. But a lot of us also assume that a headwind is always a red light from God, and that's not always true either. Sometimes, you know, even in the face of a headwind, God tells us to go. I think about our church planting journey with Sola Church. I mean, basically, we were between a rock and a hard place. On one side was a rock formation named the West Side, where like 3% attend church, and where, you know, the hostility of some is greatly outnumbered by the staggering indifference of the many. And then there's this other rock formation on the other side named COVID. As some of you know, we back in early 2020, we told the world about the dream that God had given us to launch a life-giving church in Santa Monica, California. We went live with our website. We went live with our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at that time. And literally within 1 week, the whole world shut down. It was the start of that lengthy experience that we all shared. So, I mean, goodness gracious, no one said it was going to be easy. Like, if you're watching this with somebody else, say to them, no one said this was going to be easy. I mean, Sola Church online hasn't been easy. Sola Church in person has especially not been easy. But listen, I want to tell you about our experience church planting, and I want to tell you about whatever's going on in your life, that's where the magic is. It's in the slippery places, and it's in the thorny places. That's why we have to act, even when it's hard. You know, we acted. We did startup parties in the early stages of the pandemic that were entirely online. We had online interest meetings for people and made some early connections with folks who would, join our launch team. And then once we actually got relocated to Santa Monica, which wasn't until 2021, we started doing in-person startup parties, pushing back our launch date again and again and again as the whole shutdown was protracted and just, dragged on and on. But in our in-person startup parties, I mean, we still had mask mandates here in California. So people were showing up to our startup parties wearing masks, even in early 2022, because we'd pushed all the way back to February of 2022. And even the couple weeks before our launch, when we did practice services with our team, we were still having internal conversations about whether or not we were required to put chairs 6 feet apart. I mean, that was a hard time to plant a church. But again, that's where the magic is. So we have to act even when it's hard. You're going to be surrounded by the yeah buts. You're going to say, look, God is saying to go. And somebody's going to be like, yeah, but it's slippery. You're going to be like, but God is telling us to go. And they're going to be like, yeah, but it's thorny. Well, so grab you some pain reliever and bandages and let's go. Also, number 3, we have to act when it's God. Check out verse 6. Then Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few. So notice Jonathan calling out quote, these uncircumcised, end quote. Now, I mean, circumcision wasn't as common in the ancient world as it is in the modern world. But of course, Jewish boys have always been circumcised on the 8th day. It's the sign of the Abrahamic covenant. It's part of being Jewish. But certainly in the ancient world, they were surrounded by countries who did not practice that. So Jonathan is talking trash. He's making jokes about their junk. But notice what Jonathan says. He says, it may be that the Lord will work for us. May be. Maybe. Maybe? Maybe? I mean, is that doubt that we hear in Jonathan's voice? No, because while there may have been a lack of certainty, there was no lack of clarity. I've heard a lot of people talk about this, and I've talked about it before. I'm pretty sure that we're all getting this from Andy Stanley. He wrote a book about leadership where he talked about the difference between certainty and clarity. And so many of us, not just leaders, but just so many of us in our lives are frozen because we don't have certainty. We don't know exactly how to do something or exactly how something is going to work or, where it's going to land, how it's going to play out. But if you have clarity, that's enough. By clarity, I mean that you are clear on one thing, that God's told you to go. God's told you to act. God's told you to take initiative. I think that's how it was with Jonathan. Jonathan wasn't certain how this whole thing was going to play out, but he was clear about the fact that he was to do something. If you'll act on certainty, you've got nothing, because everybody will act on certainty. You don't know anyone that won't act on certainty. But if you'll act on clarity, now you've got something. If you're willing to act even when you're not certain, but just because you're clear, now you've got really, really, really got something. This was what Stephen Furtick called a maybe moment. I remember a key maybe moment for me and for my family back in late 2015, early 2016. I was presented with the opportunity to join the staff of a church in Orange County. And I was very interested in the position. And we were making plans for me to take the position. But I had a series of meetings with the pastor whose staff I was going to join. We met several times leading up to this. And I won't ever forget the day that I went to meet with him. I expected that day to really kind of, cross the T's and dot the I's, iron out some of the details, create a very specific timeline. And when I met him at this restaurant that we were going to meet at, he shared with me that morning he was reading in the Psalms, and he actually opened his Bible and he read this passage in the Psalms. And he told me that God spoke very, very clearly to him that this was not God's plan, that God had something else for me, that I wasn't supposed to join his staff. The idea that he presented to me was that God had something bigger for me than what he was offering me. And I mean, it couldn't have come at a worse time. We had just moved back to the state of California. We were living with family members. And so, we were excited about this opportunity to have some more stability, to get moved into our own place and all of that. And so it really kind of threw us for a loop. But that's what brought us to our maybe moment. Because it was then that we said to each other, we had done, for the previous 2 years, we had done a summer tour. So here's our maybe moment. Our maybe moment when the rug is pulled out from under us is like this. It's like, well, we've done these seasonal regional tours. Maybe we could do an extended tour. Maybe we could do a national tour. But think of all the things we needed if we were going to do that. We felt like if we were going to do that, we needed a motorhome. We felt like we needed to jump into road schooling, which is basically homeschooling on the road, as we wouldn't, we'd be traveling from place to place once the school year started. And we needed gigs. right? if you're gonna tour the country, Miranda singing with me accompanying her, me speaking in churches across the country, if you're gonna do that, you're gonna need gigs, right? So that's what we needed, and that's what God provided. Family members helped us secure a motorhome, and the state of California offered free online homeschooling that we could do on the road. And the gigs just started coming. They just started coming. I mean, the next thing I knew, I had booked 6 months worth of gigs. We were on the road singing and speaking, inspiring people and bringing hope into people's lives all across the country for 6 months. We came home and took a 3-month break, and then we went right back out on tour for another 9 months. And so, over a period of like 18 months, we were on the road for like 15 of those months. I mean, that was a lot of touring, gigs every week, sometimes multiple gigs in 1 week. It was amazing, the opportunities that God gave us. The longest of those tours took us from California all the way to Maine, like from one end of the country to the other. From Maine, we made our way down the eastern seaboard and then back across the deep south and across the southwest until we were home. You know what? We didn't have certainty about any of it, but what we had was clarity. That was our maybe moment. And it turned into life-giving ministry, life-giving to the people that we touched, but life-giving for us too. Are you in a maybe moment? Or it may be that the word maybe still doesn't sit well with you. Maybe you're thinking about the message last week and about how Saul got ahead of God, and Saul, actually wrecked his life and it affected other people. Well, you know the difference between Saul and Jonathan? In chapter 13, Saul did what he knew was wrong. In chapter 14, Jonathan did what he thought was right. If we do what we know is wrong like Saul, we have no expectation at all that God's got us. But when we do what we think is right, worst case scenario, even if we're wrong, God's got us. So back to your maybe moment, we said that slippery is where the magic is. We said that thorny is where the magic is. Well, maybe is where the magic is. The magic, the miracle is in the maybe. That's why we have to act when it's God. Look at what Jonathan said to the armor bearer. He said, "For nothing restrains the Lord from saving, by many or by few." So when it's God, the math doesn't matter. You say, well, it doesn't add up. No, it doesn't. Not without God. But you add God to the equation and it does. Think about Romans 8, verse 31. If God is for us, who can be against us? Man, we're talking about new math. We're talking about God math. Call it Godometry. You and I, we need some Godometry in our lives. Well, number 4, we have to act because someone believes in us. Verse 7, so his armor bearer said to him, "Do all that is in your heart. Go then, here I am with you, according to your heart." Now, armor bearers, just to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that, they were the personal servants who carried additional weapons for the commanders. And they actually did participate in battle. Oftentimes, the commander would wound, an enemy combatant, and the armor bearer would come along behind him and take him out, finish him off. Now listen, God-given vision is almost always too big for one person. If you can accomplish your vision by yourself, it's probably not God-sized. Most God-sized vision is for you and for others. I mean, for example, even when your vision is for your own spiritual growth, you're going to need people to coach you, to play alongside of you, and to cheer you on. I cannot underemphasize how important that is. Even that last part, having people to cheer us on. This message has been pretty autobiographical, and I'm about to keep it that way. I hope you don't mind. I hope that's not spoiling this sermon for you. But, in January 2013, I was sitting at a bar. I had a beer in one hand and a shot of Jaeger in the other when I saw a message pop up on my cell phone. And it was a Facebook message from Miranda. We hadn't seen each other or spoken to each other in years. We'd both gone through very public and painful divorces. We'd both lost everything. We'd both lost our marriages, our ministries, all of our material things. But I hadn't seen Miranda, I don't think, since like 2008. It had been a long, long time that we had had no contact. And here I am at the bar seeing a notification that she has sent me a Facebook message. Well, some of you have heard me talk before about that exchange. I mean, we have talked every single day of our lives since. And that started a conversation. Like, no one could understand what she'd been through like I could. And no one could understand what I'd been through like she could. And I'll never forget what she said to me, because I thought I was done with ministry. I thought I was done with serving the local church. And you know what she said to me? She told me, there's no way that God is done with you. There's no way that you're supposed to be done. Like, you need to be speaking. And I said the same thing right back to her. Like, there's no way that God is done with you. There's no way that you're done singing. Like, you need to be singing. God wants to use you to sing, to touch people with your music and with your songs and with your voice. You know, I can speak for how I felt. I felt like no one believed in me at that point. And that's not entirely true. I had family members that have always believed in me. But I'm just talking about the world at large. In January of 2013, as I sat at that bar, man, there were a whole lot of people that did not believe in me. Not in the context of future ministry to the local church. I'm not sure I even believed in myself. I mean, I knew what I was capable of, but I did not see any future for me in ministry. But you know what? Miranda believed in me. And I believed in her. What a gift we gave each other by believing in each other and by speaking into each other's lives. And you know what? If it wasn't for Miranda, there would be no Sola Church. There would be no Sola Church Online. If you love Sola Church, if you love Sola Church Online, you owe a great big thank you to the other half of this leadership team. I can only imagine that as Jonathan spoke to his armor bearer, this had to be a tough sell. I mean, if Saul didn't think that 600 guys was enough to go up against the Philistines, what in the world was Jonathan thinking that 2 guys could do it? So Jonathan's like, here's what I'm thinking. And then Jonathan is like, where'd he go? I mean, if I was that armor bearer, I would have wanted to hightail it out of there. But, you know, I want you to think about this with me for a minute. If God could do this through 2 people, he could have done it through 1 person. God could have done this through just Jonathan. But God wanted to do it through 2. Why? Because we're better together. You know what? If you're doing this thing called the Christian life alone, if you're doing this thing called the life of faith alone, you're doing it wrong. You just are. I mean, I want to encourage you today to find yourself an armor bearer. But I want to challenge you too to be someone else's armor bearer. All of this, by the way, is why it matters that we're all part of a local church where we attend regularly. Why it's important that we all participate in a small group where we know people and where we are known by people. It's why it matters whether or not we're present, whether or not we're engaged, whether or not we are encouraging and being encouraged by other people. We have to act because someone believes in us. I mean, here's Jonathan and his armor bearer. They're high-fiving, they're chest bumping. Well, listen, who believes in you? Have you thanked them? Are you making them proud? Well, finally, we need to act because the world is waiting for us to. Look with me at verse 8. It says, "Then Jonathan said, 'Very well, let us cross over to these men and we will show ourselves to them. If they say thus to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place and not go up to them. But if they say to us, come up to us, then we will go up. For the Lord has delivered them into our hand, and this will be a sign to us.'" Now, I don't know if it's my place to say this, but that's got to be the worst plan ever. I'm not sure if I've ever heard of a worse plan than that one. Now, don't get me wrong in terms of where I'm going with this. Plans matter. And without a plan, you haven't got a prayer. But more important than the plan is the courage to act. I mean, I've met so many people over the years with plans they're never going to act on. Not every plan that you act on is guaranteed to succeed, but every plan you don't act on is guaranteed to fail. You know, I'd much rather have a good plan than a bad one, but better to have a plan that could be improved upon and act on it than to have the best plan in the world and do nothing. And so, picking it up in verse 11, so both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden. We read in the previous chapter about, the creative hiding places that the deserters had found. Then the men of the garrison called to Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us and we will show you something. Come on up. We got something to show you. Yeah, I bet. Well, this answer was the one that meant that Jonathan and the armor bearer were supposed to go up. So Jonathan said to the armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has delivered them into the hand of Israel. And Jonathan climbed up on his hands and knees with his armor bearer after him. And they fell before Jonathan. And as he came after him, his armor bearer killed them. That first slaughter, which Jonathan and his armor bearer made, was about 20 men within about half an acre of land. So remember what we learned about armor bearers, how, in this case, Jonathan wounded these Philistine combatants, and then the armor bearer came along behind him and finished them. So this was a micro victory. But in the verses that follow, we see a macro victory. I'm going to let you read those verses on your own, starting with verse 15 and going through the end of the chapter. This micro victory led to a macro victory. But it all happened because Jonathan acted. Because Jonathan and his armor bearer did something when no one else would. They led upstream, like they inspired Saul, the king, Jonathan's dad, and they inspired Ahijah, the priest. Saul comes out from under the pomegranate tree. Ahijah, stops playing with the Urim and Thummim and starts trying to use them. But they also inspired and influenced people downstream. All of a sudden, foot soldiers who had hidden are coming out of hiding and rejoining the army. So we have to act because the world is waiting for us to. They might not even know it. They might not even know they're waiting for us to act, but they'll know it when they see it. And when you and I do that inspiring thing, we're going to influence them and we're going to bring change. It's true in your life and in mine. Like, who do you need to inspire right now? Who upstream do you need to inspire? Who could you inspire? Who might you inspire? Who downstream, so to speak, might you inspire? And I believe that God wants to do this through our church. We did not launch a church in a pandemic for nothing. And it made it a whole lot harder, whereas other churches in other parts of the country launched during that time using a similar model and saw 200 people on launch day. And then went through the inevitable attrition, but never dipped below 100, and then now have since grown again to 200 and beyond. I mean, we had like 30 some people on launch day, and have limped along, gaining a person, losing a person, gaining a person, losing a person. There are lots of weekends where our attendance is in the teens in person. It has been very, very, very difficult. But are we going to give up? No way. We're not going to throw in the towel. We didn't launch a church between those two rock formations of the West Side and COVID for nothing. We're here to see people know God, to see people find freedom, to see people discover purpose, to see people make a difference. If you do read the rest of chapter 14 later, you'll discover that in verse 19, Saul says to Ahijah the priest, withdraw your hand. And that means that Ahijah, in the midst of the battle, Ahijah suddenly decides that it's time to consult the Urim and the Thummim. And Saul's like, stop that. Like, there's a time for that, but this is not that time. This is the time for us to rally. This is a time for us to battle. Let's go. Come on. Saul knew what time it was. Do you? Do I? Do we? I'm believing that 2024 is going to be a big year for you and for me and for us. I believe that 2024 is going to be a big year for Sola Church, and I'm talking to other pastors around the country and developing a strategy for what we're going to do to take Sola Church and Sola Church Online to another level in this coming year. Who's with me? Are you with me? Like, let's do this and let God get the glory. Father, thank you for this story, for the way that it inspires us in our own lives, as well as in this mission that we're on together. Lord, we're grateful for our online congregation who are as much a part of this thing as those who attend in person. Lord, together we've accomplished so much in your name and for your glory, and we want to do so much more. So Lord, inspire us to act. No, we don't want to get ahead of you, but we also don't want to fall behind you. Keep us from veering off the path to the right or the left. We just want to be in step with you. And we want to see you do all of the things that you placed in our hearts when you gave us this dream. In the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
And now it's time to fill out a Connect card.
Yeah, you can let us know that you attended online. You can request information about virtual small groups by going to our website, solachurch.life. Scroll to the bottom of the homepage, and that's where you'll find the Connect card.
And don't forget, go and follow us on social media.
Totally, that helps us out, and it's an opportunity for us to interact, for you to share our posts with other people at Sola Church LA. And while we're talking about, our online presence, I'm just going to add that, if you are inspired to participate in the year-end giving campaign, whether that's on Giving Tuesday, before that, or after that, you can just go to the website, solachurch.life, click the tab at the top that says Give, and then at the giving portal, you can choose whether your donation is going to the general budget like normal, or whether it's, an additional gift for the year-end giving. So again, thank you so much for prayerfully considering that.
And we hope that you all have a very happy Thanksgiving, and we will see you next time at Sola Church Online.
Bye, everybody.